This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group, and your host of Washington Calling, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, our guest is Dr. Sreeram Chaulia. He's a professor and dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs at OP Jindal Global University in India. He's a leading opinion columnist for Indian newspaper and world affairs and commentator on international current issue on radio and television. He anchors a TV show on India's national broadcast, Doordarshan. He tweets on global economic and political development. Thank you for coming to our show, Dr. Chaulia, and welcome to our show. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Frank. It's an honor to be on your show.
So, Dr. Chaulia, you're a columnist, TV host, and leading commentator on Indian diplomacy and foreign policy. Please tell our audience who you are, your profile, and tell me a little bit about your successful career and your journey. And I want to ask you one more question, the name of your book that you published. Go ahead.
Thank you. I don't know if I've been successful, but I'll simply mention a few things for your viewers. I'm a social scientist by training. I'm trained in international relations and with a focus on international security and international political economy. And I've authored 5 singly written books, and I'm working on my 6th one. And I cover in these 5 previous works, I've covered a range of topics and issues from international organizations in war zones to Indian foreign policy, to national security crisis, to the global economic crisis, and also one book especially of interest to American readers called Trumped, Emerging Powers in a Post-American World. That was in 2019. My new work, which I'm starting, is called Friends, India's Closest Strategic Partners, which chronicles major bilateral relationships of India with key countries, including the US, and what we're doing with them, and what is the geopolitical and economic impact of these relationships. So yeah, you can call me an eclectic social scientist. And I also head the School of International Affairs, as Frank just mentioned. And we have 650 students pursuing bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees, and also around 50 full-time faculty members in our school. So, and I write newspaper columns too. And my,
Where do you write the newspaper column?
Yeah, so Hindustan Times. That's one of the
major. That's what I do. As you know, I'm also a columnist on the Hindustan Times.
Yeah. So HT, as we call it here in India, is a major national newspaper.
It is.
And I also write in Hindi, in the main vernacular language of India, in a newspaper called Dainik Jagran, which is...
that's a Hindi newspaper, right? That's a Hindi newspaper. Okay.
It's in vernacular, yeah.
Also...
So, yeah, that's about me. I've been trying to be a public intellectual and also do a bit of what Farid Zakaria has been doing in the US, which is to host television shows. It's not usual because journalists mostly do it, but for scholars to come in from outside and bring in-depth perspective on global issues, that's what I've been trying to do all my life.
Well, you're doing a great job. We deeply appreciate your passion, your commitment, and your vision and values. Tell us a little bit about upward trajectory of Indo US ties, United States and India ties in coming decades. What roles do you intend to play in rapidly shifting sense of global geopolitics? Do you think the US-India relationship is based on shared value and shared interest and a commitment to democracy? Do you think the US enjoys a close relationship with India? I also like you to shed some bright lights of the India diaspora's help to achieve India's fullest potential. That could be there could be a vital resource.
Yeah, well, this relationship, we have been nurturing it very carefully for the last 2 decades. I think the breakthrough moment, if you ask me, was President Bill Clinton's visit in 2000.
I just talked to President Clinton 2 days ago.
Yes, of course, you're connected to the Democratic Party. I know that. So from then onwards, there has been no looking back. In many ways, across administrations in the US and across governments in India, increasingly we have grown closer. There is a convergence of interests. And I think for the US, it's very important that India grows and becomes stronger and becomes economically more prosperous. And they have made a kind of a strategic bet on India being able to be the main counterweight to authoritarian China
Yeah.
in Asia. And I think the anxiety about China's aggression and expansionism and power is certainly something that both India and the United States share. So I think that's a very critical factor. But it's also not just geopolitics. There's a big market. India's growing at 6 to 7% per annum, and we'll have a middle class of more than 500 million consumers. So this is a big market. It's always been huge. I think the bilateral trade volumes are more than 160, $170 billion per annum now. And of course, the US does more trade with China, but then at the projected rates.
$1 trillion, yeah. China.
At least 500. I mean, yeah, since the Trump tariffs,
you're right.
5 or 600. So that's like almost 3 times bigger than what the US does with India. But India's growth is going to outpace China's, in the coming decade. China has now hit a new normal of barely 3%. And they're going to be, they've exhausted.
You're absolutely right. And I hope that happens. But India has to still have to play with the infrastructures and a lot of other things they have to do to make sure that they can attract the consumers and also become not part of China. I don't mean to say that. What I meant to say, try to counteract the Chinese influence, not only in the United States, but in India as well. What are your thoughts on PM Modi's successful hosting the G20 summit? And how much do you attribute this success in PM Modi's foreign policy? Do you think he's leading the way? And there were a lot of discussions and enduring division over the Russia's, the war in Ukraine. And do you think that India foreign compromises among, a lot of things that the Modi did in terms of the compromising with the divided world? And so tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah, India has a strategic partnership with Russia and also with the US. And so it's always a balancing act. And in this region, in Asia, Russia has been a trusted military supplier for India's security since the 1960s. So even though the Ukraine war has created lots of doubts about the sustainability of Russia as a major military producer and supplier for us, for the moment, we have not dissociated ourselves because we cannot, because our national interests, we have a major China threat, which we just talked about. And Russian weaponry historically has helped us to balance and counterbalance the Chinese aggression on our borders. So so I think what we have tried to do, and Prime Minister Modi has tried to do, is have the cake and eat it too, which is, we continue to have the strong strategic partnerships with the US and with the Europeans, and at the same time continue to maintain the old partnership with Russia. But many of us are of the view that, we may have to reassess because of the Russia-China closeness and the alignment. In Indian statecraft tradition, there is a very famous writer called Kautilya, and he was in the before Christ, 2 millennia ago, and his logic was that your enemy's enemy is your friend, right? But what if your enemies? So if Russia is used to be your enemy's enemy, meaning it used to counter China for us, but if Russia is now our enemy's friend, then what is Russia to us? So we are all ourselves. It's going to be, it's a time of transition, and
it's the time you have to figure it out.
Time to come, yeah.
So you recently interviewed Foreign Minister S. Jaishankars, who was as you know, that he was ambassador of India to United States, and I met him several times on the national television. What's your assessment of him and his thoughts on foreign policy? Do you think he's leading the way? Do you think that his foreign policy is based on the protecting India's national interest?
He's a very sharp thinker and strategist, and I've had the fortune of engaging with him many times, and I've hosted him twice on my TV show, but I've known him from before as well. And he actually has a very sharp sense of who our main partners are and who our adversaries are. And in that sense, there's more clarity, less ambiguity. And although he spent his whole life in the career bureaucracy as a diplomat, now he's a member of parliament and elected, and he's in politics. So he's definitely adapted to this new role as a minister, which is equivalent to like a secretary in the US system. And what he has tried to do is sharply articulate Indian viewpoint, but also come up with new grand strategy to become a leading power. That is the phrase of the Modi government. And what it will take to become a leading power is not just high economic growth, is not just these partnerships that we spoke about, strategic partnerships. It also requires India to take an independent line on many global issues, so that it's not seen to be a follower of anyone, but a leader. And which has a distinct position on issues and which can then marshal. So a lot of emphasis has gone on, creating a kind of a India way or an India narrative in the world, especially in developing countries where, the real competition with China is there. Because in Africa, in Latin America, in poorer parts of Asia, India is running into the Chinese juggernaut because they're already there. They put a lot of money into these places. So how do we counteract this? How do we expand our influence? So it's not just the territorial dispute with China, but a broader competition with China. And Jaishankar is definitely alert and awake to this. So more clarity, strategic clarity, that's what I would credit him. And also more ambition for India to become
What's the
leading power. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And country. Yeah.
Let's change our gears and talk about your thoughts on the friction between Canada and India. That's pretty bad, as they know. Do you think the government of India played any role in killing of this fellow, the Sikh citizens? And as Prime Minister Trudeau, who I know personally very well, has accused India. Do you think that India's conflict will place the United States in a difficult and a delicate situation? And what happens in terms of the immigration to Canada from India, which is close to several 100,000? So that's going to have a lot of several effect on it, and you have to talk to the people who are trying to get what I consider the immigration to the Canada.
Yeah, this is an unfortunate incident.
That's a good way to put it. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any major conflict of interest with Canada. We're democratic countries, but I think I think Justin Trudeau could have dealt with it quietly. I mean, going public and making an accusation against a historically friendly country in Parliament didn't go down well in India. If there is some sensitive national security or intelligence that they have or evidence,
as I understand, the intelligence came from, as I understand, from New York Times, from the United States.
They say that they have shared something, but as of now, what they're saying is, we have credible allegations and such things. So wiretapping of diplomats and trying to read into what they're talking about, probably, I don't know. I mean, it's still in the realm of speculation. But whatever it is, I mean, look, I'm not privy to the inside affairs of the national security apparatus of our country. But what I can say is that the manner in which it could have been handled, I think it's a sensitive issue. I mean, India does not interfere in internal affairs of our fellow democracies. It's not like China. It's not like Russia. So I think they should have been dealt in a more sensitive way. As to the US, I would say, I think for the US, they are, like we spoke before, the containment or counterbalancing of China is the primary consideration in the Indo-Pacific. So I think India is indispensable for them, and they are not going to be judging India by on the basis of Justin Trudeau's allegations. So as far as I have seen since this episode occurred, U.S.-India strategic cooperation, even military exercises, joint coordination, all these are continuing unimpeded. So I don't think that the U.S. can even afford to alienate India, because then the game is up. The game is up. It's over in Asia. Then China will that's going to end the counterbalancing strategy, or what we call offshore balancing strategy of China, because India is the biggest counterweight to China. So I think the US is taking a more, what I would call, a realpolitik view of these things. And remember, for example, President Biden, when he was campaigning, was saying that Saudi Arabia is a pariah state because they carried out an assassination of their own citizen in Turkey. You remember the Jamal Khashoggi affair?
Yeah, I do
and
know.
then and then, lo and behold, President Biden landed up in Riyadh and did the fist bump with Mohammed bin Salman. So I think every country does, especially bigger powers, take into consideration a range of interests when they conduct foreign policy. So Canada is a small player. Canada is what we can call a middle power. So they may afford to be outraged, quote unquote, on the basis of some evidence that they claim to have. But I think the US will take a more hard-nosed realpolitik view on this, and we are confident about the US-India relationship going ahead without any problem.
But expelling the diplomat from Canada and also from India is not a moving forward strategy for the India as well as for Canada. So it's both ways. So let me.
There will be a cooling off. There will be a cooling off.
It should cool off, because both are
it's
democratic
already
countries.
off the headlines. As
it should be.
They should take this conversation to the level of the national security advisors and to the interior ministers and such things, and try to sort this out. I would hope that there's less of a hue and cry about this and more of a quiet settlement where, okay, if we have red lines too. I mean, our problem has been that Canada has been sheltering a lot of hardline extremists who are wanted in India, fugitives and terrorists. So let Canada do something for us and we'll do something for them. That's how usually these matters are settled.
Well, but the fact of the matter is there's close to 500,000 people who are basically waiting for the immigration visa to Canada, and Canada is a pretty big country. It's the largest. It's the larger than the United States is. Canada is, as you know, and their standard of living is very, very high, and so they have to figure that out. You're absolutely right. Tell us, our audience, that you have been a contributing editor of Kashmir News Network for minority victims of ethnic cleansing in Jammu and Kashmir. What's this all about? And what is this Kashmir News Network? Is it owned by the government of India?
No. This was actually a kind of a consortium of overseas-based Kashmiris who had faced ethnic cleansing and who had been at gunpoint forced to leave their homeland during the 1990s, when there was like a big insurgency and a jihadist fervor in the valley. Now it's interesting, Frank. We have spoken about Indian foreign policy for so long, and we haven't even come to Pakistan and Kashmir, and that itself shows how much the priorities and the focus have changed. We've talked a lot about China and very less about Kashmir and Pakistan, and that's the reason is this issue, as you know, has a long history since the partition of India in 1947. After British colonial rule, but increasingly it's receding. There are incidents, there are attacks, and there is a dispute between India and Pakistan over this territory. But because of Pakistan's internal weaknesses and turmoil, they have a big political crisis, and there are people challenging the military and its rule, and it's collapsed economically, and it's fallen far behind India. I mean, India is now almost a $4 trillion economy, and Pakistan is not even a $1 trillion economy. So they're not going to be able to compete. So in that sense, Kashmir and these issues used to be seen as the number one problem for India as a number one security issue, when Pakistan was seen as a number one adversary or threat, but less and less so. In fact, our former army chief and former chief of defense staff went public saying China is the enemy number one, and because it's much more capable, it's much bigger than India, and it threatens our territory and our influence in a way that Pakistan cannot even dream of. So in a way, we have left Pakistan behind. So I would hope that eventually, and in fact, strategically also, we have these what we call the two front dilemma. On the western side is Pakistan, and on the northern side is China. We would like to avoid a two front where both of them are simultaneously threatening us. So we would want to make peace with Pakistan and to actually let this Kashmir dispute lie low, and focus on economic development and integration of Kashmir rather than on fighting wars. I mean, we've had enough wars with Pakistan. We don't need any more, and they can't afford one. So our focus is to shift our forces and our strategic attention to facing the China challenge. So in that sense, hopefully, the Kashmir issue should be on the slow burn and should not be making headlines anymore.
Do you think India is a democratic country in considering the fact there's no human right and also there's no freedom of press in India, and there's no expression of the people to speak up and speak out? I don't want you to comment on
I would
it.
disagree with that formulation, Frank. I think we see a fair variety of viewpoints, including ones which are highly critical of the current government. There are TV channels, there are newspapers, there are internet blogs, all of them highly critical, and every day I come across websites and TV channels which have not been shut down and which continue to air anti-Modi and anti-government viewpoints.
Well,
So
that's
there
the way
is
it should be in a democratic country.
yeah, there is that. There is that, and I don't see it eroding at all. And remember, there are many states of India which are not ruled by Mr. Modi's party, and so there is balance. So I don't think there's a problem with democracy. Media, look, we have had a problem with press freedom for a long time. It's not just in the current regime, and a lot of it has to do with like incidents happening at the state level in many parts of the country. It adds up to, let's say, a big country of 1.4 billion. There may be like 1,000 incidents where journalists have been attacked or have been forced to change their stories or threatened, and they all add up to low press freedom. We are worried about that, but it's not like there's one centralized entity that's making this happen. India is like the US, it's like a federal system with lots of differences in different states, and in some of the states the atmosphere is not good. So we are concerned about that.
That's a good way to put it, not good. Well, thank you, Ms. Dr. Chaulia, for being here. And this is Frank Islam wishing you a great week, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.